What I've got here is the SMSL D-6S, and it's a really compact, very affordable DAC from SMSL obviously, and I really like the new design of it, the look, the interface, etc. But as is often the case with all these products from SMSL, Topping and similar brands, the big question comes down to whether they sound any different. So I decided to give this one a go and find out. At just $199 US, this is a pretty affordable DAC. It's not the cheapest on the market, but it's also got a few things going for it, such as balanced outputs that some of the cheaper DACs don't. In addition to that, it's DSD capable, it's got Bluetooth, including high-res codecs like LDAC and aptX HD, and it's also got MQA decoding if you care about that. And so I'm going to cut straight to the chase and talk about the sound quality of the D6S in just a second, but first I want to say thanks to Apos for sending this unit out and making this review possible. And now let's jump into how it sounds. Of course, if you want to know about the features, functions, interface, etc., I'll cover all that at the end, but first of all, we're going to get to sound quality. And I'd say that off the bat, in isolation, the D6S sounds good. When it comes to DACs these days, it's very hard to get a bad one. And that's where part of the problem comes in with all these new models constantly coming out from brands like SMSL and Topping, is they all sound much the same. And that's to say that the sound from the D6S is clean, it's detailed, the soundstage is nice and wide, it's actually got a little bit of depth which is nice for a DAC like this. And the sound's equally as good whether you're using the USB input or one of the SPDIF inputs, that being coaxial or optical. So really there's nothing to complain about. For $199 US, you're getting a really good, serviceable and solid DAC with RCA outputs, XLR outputs, and all the different digital inputs, all the basic digital inputs that you could expect. And so because most DACs do sound the same, the big question for me was not whether or not this sounded any good. It does. The next question though for me was, is it worth spending that money on it? Are you getting any benefits here other than perhaps extra inputs? To spend $199 US on something like the D6S versus saving some money and buying something like the Schiit Modi Plus for $129 US. Now, as I said before, there are other DACs on the market at around about this same price, so this is not the only option. Topping have got the excellent E30 DAC, SMSL no doubt have cheaper ones too that I'm forgetting off the top of my head. But at $129 US, I thought the Modi Plus was a nice comparison point. Now the Modi Plus doesn't have Bluetooth, it doesn't have MQA, it's not balanced so it's RCA output only, and it's also using an older ES9018 chip compared to the 9039Q2M used in the D6S. That doesn't necessarily mean that the D6S is automatically going to sound better though. I've heard older DAC chip implementations in the past from brands like IEMS outperform newer implementations, again from brands like Topping, SMSL, FIO, others like that. And that's not a knock on any individual brand here. The point is it all comes down to the output stage, the DAC setup, the overall circuit, power management, all of those things. And so to get this one set up, I had to make sure I volume matched the two of these because the XLR outputs from the D6S that I was using are a little bit higher voltage output than what you get from the Modi Plus. But once I got them volume matched, I was able to switch back and forth using the RCA output from the Modi Plus, the XLR output from the D6S. They were both connected up to the Burson Voyager, and that review's coming soon. That was using Curious interconnects, either XLR or RCA depending on the DAC. And then after the Voyager, I was driving the Mesa Audio Elites headphones. One of the tracks I used for my testing was Everything's Not Lost by Coldplay, and flicking back and forth between the two of these, they are almost completely interchangeable. And that's to say that there's really no way anybody's going to tell the difference in a blind listening test. Now that's not always the case. There are definitely DACs where you can clearly hear a difference. But as is the case here, there's absolutely no chance, I think, that people are really going to pick a difference here. Having said that, there are very, very subtle differences. And that is that I found the mid-range and the bass just a tiny, tiny little bit fuller from the Modi Plus. Now some are going to actually prefer the more lean, analytical sound, and we're talking sort of fractional differences here, but the slightly leaner sound from the D6S will be to some people's liking. On the other hand, the slightly fuller sound through the mid-range from the Modi Plus will be preferable to others. And it's also worth mentioning that some of this could have come down to the fact that one is balanced and one is single-ended. That can change the character of the sound just a little bit too. But really what this tells us is that there's absolutely no point spending more than the $129 Schiit Modi Plus or another equivalent DAC. And I've got my full review of the Modi Plus, I've got reviews of the Topping E30 and other cheaper DACs on the channel, but there's no point spending more money than what you pay for those to get something like the D6S unless you particularly want its sound quality. Or if you want the design of the D6S, which I think is a fantastic design. And so aesthetically, if you want the look of the D6S, or if you want the extra connectivity, the D6S is an excellent DAC. The point being here that there's so many excellent DACs on the market that spending more is not always necessary. You're not getting better sound, definitively better sound, spending an extra $70 on the D6S than you are on something like the Modi Plus. And so instead, let's focus more on the features, functions, and design of the D6S, because that's why you choose this one. And one of the things I really like about it, I love this display setup. It's got this kind of matte finish to it, so when you first look at it, it looks like it's just a raised section on the main front panel that's made of the same materials. But then when you switch the DAC on, behind this kind of slightly grainy matte surface finish is an actual LED or OLED display. It's a white, clean display. And so I like the display design. I think it's very subtle, but also unique with this way it sort of sits up and it's raised a little bit in front of the actual front of the cabinet or the casing here. You've then got your control wheel, which is a good size. It feels good to turn, and then you can click on it to access the menu and scroll through the menu. I really love the front panel of this one. If you are looking for a classy, compact looking DAC with a nice display and a nice interface, then the SMSL D-6S is an excellent option for that. And the other reason you might then choose it is what we have on the back. So around here, as I've already said, we've got XLRs and RCAs, whereas on the cheaper DACs, like the Modi Plus, you're only going to get RCA. Of course, it's important to note here that XLR is not better than RCA. They're just different. So you don't actually need to chase balanced. It's not inherently better. And in fact, as I've already mentioned, the testing I did for these two DACs was XLR out of the D6S, RCA out of the Modi Plus, and there was basically no difference. So don't feel like you have to buy XLR just because it's balanced, just because people tell you balanced is better. It's not accurate. I'll cover that off in a video soon. But if for some reason you do specifically want balanced, and or if you want to have two outputs, maybe you want to run a single-ended output to a tube amp and your balanced output to a solid-state amp, that's where the D6S could be great. We've got a coaxial input with RCA split-off there. We've got an optical input. We've got a Bluetooth antenna that's going to take aptX HD, LDAC, and of course the lower level codecs. And then we've got a USB-C socket as well. Finally, we've got a mains connector there. And what that means is that even though this doesn't use a wall wart supply, there is going to be a little switch mode power supply on the inside. That's neither good nor bad. I'm just pointing out that's what's going on here. And so this is offering all of the basic features you would want from a DAC at $199 US. I think it looks great. It performs great. It sounds really good. The menu gives you options like access to the filtering, into the phase lock loop system, which helps to reduce jitter, although generally you shouldn't really need that on most modern components. What I mean by that is you shouldn't need to change it on most modern components, just leaving it set as it is should be completely fine. And then you can change things like the brightness of the display, etc. So it's a really nice looking unit, great to interact with. And then a couple of things that I did mention at the beginning, and I'll just come back around on, is it will decode DSD. It'll also do DSD over PCM for DSD64, or that's up to DSD64, through the coaxial and the optical. And as I've already mentioned, it'll also play back MQA, although MQA is becoming less and less common as titles start to move away from it. And so I'm going to keep this one really short and just say, I think the D6S is great. It doesn't set my world on fire. It doesn't change anything. I just think if you're in the market for a new DAC at the moment, and this is on your list, it's a lovely looking, great performing DAC. But if you're thinking you should spend $199 instead of say $130 US, there's probably not a great deal of need unless you want the specific features in the D6S. And so with that in mind, I'm going to wrap this one up. I hope this video has been useful and helpful to you, either to help you make your decision, to maybe save you some money and head you in a different direction, whatever the reason. If it has been useful and helpful, then please hit the like button and subscribe and ring the notification bell if you haven't already. But for now, let me leave it to the music, so happy listening, be kind to each other, and I'll see you here next time on Passion for Sound.